Today, I'm going to make an assumption about all of you sitting in this room. And in doing so, I'm also assuming that I am right. My assumption is that grace is a familiar concept to all of us here. I hope for it to be, anyway. We sing of its amazing qualities to save wretches like us, find the lost, and give sight to the blind. God's grace is truly a sweet sound. For it is God's grace that has carried us through the less than desirable moments of our lives. And hopefully, by God's grace, we have come to appreciate the good ones too. Truthfully, God's grace is just such a comforting word. It is a word and a reality that causes us to feel as if the divine arms are wrapped around us in a warm embrace. It is a marvelous thing. Well, most of the time, that is. Because we do have to admit that when grace shows up, it brings its own set of problems to the table, especially when its vast arms reach far beyond the boundaries that we have attempted to create for it, embracing people, creatures, and a world that we are often at odds with. The truth is, sometimes grace can sound an awful lot like a four-letter word, offending our senses and perceptions of the world, attacking the boundaries that we have tried to place upon it, and confronting us with the reality of who we actually are in light of who God really is. The story of Jonah can testify to this. If you look at what was happening before what my mentor kindly just read for me, you can begin to imagine with me this story. Like most of us, Jonah's world was neat and tidy before the voice of God sounded, calling him into a new reality. Everything fit into the categories he assigned to the world around him. And these categories were black and white. There was good and there was evil. There was us and there was them. And those belonging to us did not go anywhere near those belonging to them. There was God's abundant, steadfast love, grace, and mercy. And then there was God's wrath. And of course, God's grace, love, and mercy was reserved for those belonging to us, whereas God's wrath was always for them. It was a simple world, an easy world to understand. The barriers were established, the lines of division drawn, and most importantly, Jonah was content with the boxed-in world of his own creation. And then the call of God came, ringing in his ears, disrupting the balance of his world, and the voice of God issued a command. Rise and go to Nineveh. And it was a command powerful enough to tear down the boundaries he had created and erase the lines of division he had drawn. And I am even willing to say it was a call he never expected. What would a call like that mean, you ask? Well, surely God would not send him to the people of Nineveh, because God could not care about them. They were not part of the chosen people. They were not part of the people God called up out of Egypt. They were not the descendants of the promise made to Abraham. They were wicked, violent people, and if you look at it, God is the one who says so. They deserved whatever punishment they were dealt, because God had no business sending Jonah to a place like that. And Jonah knew it. So he ran. He ran as fast as his short legs would carry him, just as many before him and many that would come after him, trying to escape the presence of God. Because the journey that God was calling him to travel was not one that he was interested in. God's call was a summons into a new world, a world full of new horizons. One not contained in categories and boundaries, a world that realized God's freedom to bestow grace and love upon all people. A world so held together by grace and love, mercy and forgiveness, acceptance and peace, that the thems were now a part of us. It was an opportunity for growth and love, but Jonah does not rise to the call. Instead, he descends. He descends into the depths of disobedience, running down to Joppa and boarding the vessel of his escape. He continues his descent, going down into the bowels of the ship, seeking a false sense of peace and tranquility. And it is there that he falls asleep, because running from God must be an extremely exhausting task. He snored through the howling wind and the tumultuous waves that threatened the lives of all on board that ship. And after trying all their options, the crew finally realized that the only way to escape death themselves in this storm was to sacrifice Jonah. So they hurl him into the howling wind and raging sea, and Jonah sinks like a rock, his disobedience causing him to descend far lower than he was ever meant to go. Now, I cannot speak from your experience, but I know that I personally understand Jonah's response a lot more intimately than I would ever like to admit. In my honest moments, I am forced to recognize that I operate from the same place of fear and insecurity that Jonah did. I divide the world into categories, listing criteria for the extension of grace. I set up boundaries to protect myself from those who could threaten my understanding of the world. My world is defined by the competition of people who I deem to be like me and those who I also deem to be not like me. These lists and boxes keep me safe. They keep my world perfectly ordered, and they protect me from going near them, whoever them happens to be at the time. There is no risk involved in this tiny world I have created, which allows me to live my life in a posture of self-preservation. And as I do so, I sink deeper and deeper into the depths, searching for God's grace in a system that does not allow for such a reality, which may be why when I glimpse it breaking in, I find myself offended by its extravagance. I recoil at the thought of mercy, and the sweet chord of grace sounds much more like a 4-letter word. Though I hate to admit this, there are times when I begin to see the arms of God's grace, love, and mercy encompassing the whole world. And I become angry. Because my desire for justice, what I deem to be true justice, far outweighs my desire for that justice to be forgiveness. In those moments when I begin to see who God really is and who I am not, my world is shaken, and I realize just how far I have fallen into the depths of the life-threatening waters. As Jonah sank further into the dark depths of the sea, it seems that he would finally escape the presence of the one who had called him. Yet even there, in the depths, God extended extravagant grace to embrace the one who had been running from him. Quite literally swallowing Jonah up in the form of a larger-than-life fish, God's grace was there. 3 long and repulsive days and nights later, you all know the story, Jonah was vomited onto dry land and is confronted with the persistent call of God once more. I would like to say that being confronted with God's grace had changed him, and that he accepted his mission in utmost devotion. I would like to tell you that he began to realize the height, depth, width, and breadth of God's love, mercy, and grace. I would like to say that the message he proclaimed to Nineveh was one that offered repentance and hope. I would like to say that, but I can't. What I can say, though, is that the people of Nineveh embraced the message that Jonah did bring and began to turn from their evil deeds and wicked ways. The whole city overturned themselves to God, fulfilling just what Jonah had said would happen. And seeing this, God had compassion on them. God changed his mind about them and did not bring evil against them. This, of course, was not what Jonah desired. Jonah's world, which had operated from a place of fear and self-preservation, is shaken, and he becomes angry. Far angrier than I can ever imagine being, actually. His anger rises from somewhere deep in his stomach and moves up into his chest, threatening to consume everything in its presence. And he cries out to God, confessing this burning sensation that is now coursing through his veins. "This is why I fled from you," he shouts, fists raised in the air. "For I knew you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing." The ancient creed of his faith is now the cause of his anger. The same grace that spared his life is now the reason he would rather die. Rather than turning away or granting Jonah's request, God looks down into the face of God's angry child, much in the same way I imagine God looks at us. And God asks, "Is it right for you to be angry? Is it appropriate for you to be upset with me for being the God I have always said that I am? Should I not have had the same compassion on those who did not know their right hands from their left that I had upon you in the depths that threaten your life?" The funny thing about the story of Jonah is that it is left unresolved. The question is left unanswered. What did Jonah do? What will I do? What will we do? I cannot answer any of those questions with certainty. But if I am certain about anything from this story, it is that the gracious and merciful God, who is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, will pursue us in our attempts to flee into the security of our categories. It will follow us into the depths of our well-ordered attempts at self-preservation. And God, by God's infinite grace, mercy, love, and wisdom, will continue to call us into a new reality. God's arms are open wide, waiting to engulf us in the warmth of grace, mercy, and love, waiting to tear down the barriers that we have erected and erase the lines of division we have drawn that divide us from each other. The choice to live in such an offensive reality, defined by such an offensive grace, is left entirely up to us.